Hello! Today we'll be looking at what's in this box from Sequre? I'm not sure how you say it. Anyway, but before we get into that, a quick reminder to please like or dislike this video if you didn't like it. Comment down below, don't forget to subscribe, and if you can find that little bell icon, click on it and it might tell you when I'm uploading stuff. This is a soldering iron. It's called the Sequre, I don't know. Sequre, maybe they're going with that. The SQ-001 electric soldering iron. And I have to say, when I first saw it, I instantly thought, it's a TS100. It looks almost the same, and I did ask Sequre about it. Let me know how you say this, and they said, yeah, it looks similar, it can run the same firmware, it's our own design. So take that as face value. It's like a TS100, but the price is certainly right. It's pretty inexpensive, so I wanted to have a test of this and see how it performed. Let's get it out of the box and see what's inside. And the interesting answer is more than I expected. I'll do the obvious bits first. This is the body. This is one of the tips. This is a kind of weird chiselly tip. You'll notice if you've got TS100 style, they look absolutely compatible. So easy swap over. I'll do some close-ups of these later. There's minor differences, but it's very similar, obviously. But there is some stuff in the back of this box which you didn't get with the TS100, which is quite nice. First off, some instructions, actual printed instructions, and there's quite a lot to it. It goes through quite a lot of the bits and pieces of the operations, the calibration, all the bits. That's unusual, I quite like that. Some stuff about safety instructions and how to update the firmware. Some stickers, why not? And then we're into the good stuff, and this is the good stuff because this is things I had to pay for. After I got my TS100, I then bought this sponge and stand, and I also had to buy this. Well, I didn't have to buy this, I could have made one, but these were a bit of a pain to get hold of, these particular barrel connectors, so I could plug an XT60 in. But in here we have a plug with an XT60 at one end, and almost exactly that same stand I had, as well as an Allen key here and a couple of bolts, so you can actually undo it and get the tip in. That's what's in the box, but let's go to a close-up and find out a bit more about what's installed on it right now and how's it look when we turn it on and things like that. Okay, so here we are in close-up to show you the device, well, close-up. You see you've got the A and B buttons, you've got the OLED screen. At the back here we've got the barrel connector and the USB for, well, you can change some settings through there and you can upgrade the firmware. This is the screw for undoing the tip. The tip just then goes in and out, and this is the one which came default with it. It's kind of a chisel tip which looks like that. So because we have to, let's compare with the TS100. You see there's some differences, certainly. Not many. It does run the same firmware as far as I can see, and can run the same firmware. So the same concept of design, running the same open source firmware, but you do seem to get a bit more in the pack with this one. And if you use the TS100, if you plug in a USB cable, it comes up and says config, and at the point on your PC you will have a file called config.txt. You can change a load of things, or you can do it through the default firmware that's on there. Let's actually plug some power in next. So I actually use a charger that can act as a power supply, and I'm telling it to put out a 24 volt signal. Go first, it's going to come up with the button I can press to turn it on, or if we press this button, it tells us the status right now, and we can go through several things: working temperature, sleep time, idle time, all that governs. This is basically the same firmware basically as runs on the normal one. Let's just do a quick test to see how quickly it can heat up. I think the default there is its working temperature is 300 degrees. So if we press go, so 25 degrees was the start temperature, now at 200, now at 300. Yep, that was pretty quick, and if I remember rightly, you just hold those down and they cool down again. So that's pretty fast. And as mentioned before, the details of all that firmware and how it works is set up quite nicely in this, and you can just use it like that. I'm used to using the Raylim firmware, so I thought, well, what would be more fun than immediately updating it before I've even put some solder on the tip. So to do that, it's a case of holding down a button while plugging in a
USB cable, and it should go into Dfu mode. What I'm going to do is just wait till this cools down first, because it's still at 174 degrees. Wow, focus problems today. Okay, it's finished cooling down, so I need to go into Dfu mode to flash to firmware. So it's a case of holding A and then plugging in the USB cable, and it says Dfu 3.45. Now what we should see is a little device come up on our computer, and what we can do is just drag the hex file over that we've downloaded onto this, and that will reflash the firmware. Okay, so touching USB, comes up in Dfu and has this really interesting device name. And if I go over to my TS100 directory, you can see there's loads of different versions. They're all language based, and I just need to grab the hex file for the English, chuck it there, and that's reconnected, and it's got the RDY extension. That means the firmware is now ready, so I just need to disconnect that and go and try it out. Okay, new firmware on, let's plug in, and we get this little thing, which is basically you've got a load of different options in here, which you can go through and change all sorts of things really easily. And you press the A button to turn it on. I have to say there's nothing wrong with the original firmware on it. I just found the Ralim's software a lot better, and you can boost it and you can get the temperature up higher. Let's turn it on. Let me bring my soldering mat back, just protect things a bit. I've got the little bit of water in there. The sponge has popped up nicely. Got some solder. I also like these are so good. This is great for cleaning your tip, but when a little bit of hot solder gets stuck there, just dipping it in that will really sort it out. I don't know how well this camera is going to focus, let's find out, but if we, what we do, come out of that, let's turn on, get heating up. Oh, that's nice and quick. So the default temperature on this is so 320, and we can easily change this just by saying I'm going to go to, like, let's say 360. So let's check that against some solder. Here's some solder. Wow, this is really hard to do in the camera. Yeah, as suspected, it's got no problems melting that. Normally I do this with a fan, so that doesn't happen to me. Shall we see if we can actually solder a piece of wire? Oh my goodness, this is awkward angle. Am I sort of vaguely in focus? The answer is no. There's got my hand now. I think I can't do this looking at the camera. Wow. You don't know how hard soldering is until you try and do it through a camera lens. Oh, this is awful. This is the worst piece of soldering I've ever done. All I wanted to do is put a bit of solder on that. Look at the state of that. This is what happens if you try and do things in a camera lens when you really can't see what you're doing. I don't recommend it. But anyway, that got up the temperature very quickly, and we can just quickly push both buttons and you'll see it start to go down. It's no good me trying to show you bits of me soldering because it just looks like me soldering. What I want to do is go away and use this for a couple of days. I've got some jobs to do, see how it goes. I might try using the other tip. This tip's quite big. Fine work, I tend to use something like that, or the sort of flatter chisel if I'm doing something a little bit bigger. This one here has got quite a big edge, so it's good for sort of larger jobs. This is sort of single wire stuff, or very thin connectors, very good. And of course I can use this tip in there, so that's not a problem. But yeah, rather than try and show you me solder, which is not pretty at the best of times, what I'm going to do is go and use this, and I'll come back and I'll tell you what I thought about it. Odds on it's going to feel the same as this one, in which case, you know, it's hard to fault really, because I always love the TS100. This is the same sort of thing, but cheaper. And of course you can get different tips for this. Sequre sell the different ones, and you can order it with a different tip as well, so not a problem there. Anyway, I'll go off and do that now, and I'll come back with some final thoughts. Well, it's been a few days and I've been using this for my general soldering tasks, and as I thought, it felt very familiar and it just worked. I've mostly not been using this tip, I have to say. This is my sort of go-to tip for most things. But although I'd say one general tip about tips, bad play on words, is
These are great for, or this one at least, is very good for sort of general purpose small soldering tasks. The only time when it doesn't work, and even the larger one like this, is if you're dealing with very large gauge wire, typically your battery connections and going onto the solder pads, when you really need to have a lot of heat on the iron. Now these have no problems, especially with that boost control going up to 450 and keeping that sustained temperature. But because the area of, especially in this one, the area that heats up is quite small, you won't get that melt through. So it's kind of a case of there isn't one tip to rule them all. I use this one a lot. The other tip I would use, and I don't actually have one, I need to get one, is called the C4, and this is a large chisel where the chisel is much too large for your small stuff, but because it's got a much larger surface area, it should be much better for those larger gauge wires going onto larger solder pads. But for most things I'm using this. The last thing I did is I joined some wires on there, which I need to then put back together. But yeah, it works really nicely as expected. So if you haven't already got a hobby soldering iron, or perhaps you're using one of these cheap and nasty ones that I've still got lying around here, then definitely take a look at this. And of course, one of the advantages are, if you're one of these racer guys that is going to go around and crash your quad into race gates and perhaps break something, this is a great sort of on the move tool where you could just take it with you, solder a few bits on if you've smashed them up, and hopefully get on with your racing. If I had a nitpick, it would be that I'd have liked this cable to be a bit longer and a bit less stiff, but that's mostly because my power's over here and I'm over here. I suppose if I put my power that side it wouldn't be so much of a problem, but you know, the bigger the better. Other than that, absolutely no problems at all. So a thoroughly good little product, highly recommended, especially if you don't have an iron like this. Really handy to have in your repertoire. So I have to say thank you to Sequre for getting in contact and sending this over, and I'm really sorry if I'm mispronouncing your company name. And you can find links down below for where you can get hold of one of these direct from Sequre themselves. Anyway, I hope that review's been helpful, and I will catch you next one. Bye for now. Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.